So occasionally here, I will tell some stories. I've got stories that I weave into things that I do, and I'm trying to keep this shorter. And so some of the stories I'll just tell separately. One of the stories that I talk about that's important to some of the founding of how I became who I am and how I think about things. One of these stories is, I think, apropos to our current time. This idea that people from different sides can't get along with each other. One of the most interesting days of my entire life. I wish I could remember exactly how old I was, but I was I was a kid, probably 10 years old, something like that, and it was a day in Washington D.C. My grandfather was the dean of business at Central Washington University. He and my grandmother took a year off in sabbatical, and part of that year they had gone to Washington D.C. to work on some things in Washington D.C. And I spent a day there with them that really stands out. And it was the first thing that happened that morning was we got up and got to tour the White House. At that time, if you went to the White House, I'm not sure how it is right now. The last time I've taken groups to Washington D.C., the White House was closed down by Obama. He wasn't letting anybody in. But when I went when you toured the White House, you did it early in the morning. So this will tell you how far back it was. The president of the White House at that time was Ronald Reagan. And so we get up, and our tour was at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we were walking through the line, touring the public part of the house, of the White House, and Ronald Reagan comes walking into the room, and here's the President of the United States, and not only is the President of the United States right there, but he's in his pajamas and bathrobe. Very presidential pajamas and bathrobe, blue with red piping on them, with the presidential seal on them, and blue slippers. And he comes through the line and he's shaking everybody's hands, and he says very nice things, and he shook the hands of even us kids, and then he went on upstairs back to the private residence of the White House. And I've later heard that was a fairly normal thing. It was not uncommon for him because of where he would breakfast in the White House. He would get done with breakfast and he would come down the stairs from breakfast and cross through the public area, knowing we were all there, and then going back upstairs into the other. And it's also an interesting thing when you think about Ronald Reagan was the guy who wouldn't enter the Oval Office without a tie, wouldn't let anybody else enter the Oval Office without a tie. He had this great respect for the office. On the other hand, he wasn't averse to sharing with the general public that he was just a guy in a bathrobe, even if his bathrobe had the presidential seal on it. So that, I mean, even from a kid, that stands out to me as meeting a person like that. And my grandparents were big. They're politically active, and so we met lots of interesting, amazing people. I'm sure those people will come up in other stories, and we would regularly meet people of high social or political status or business status. And my grandfather really impressed upon me that those people were just like everybody else. That's one of the great things about America, is this principle that those people aren't better than us. They're not born higher. They're not. If they become great people, which I believe Ronald Reagan was, it was because of something he took on himself to do. He wasn't born to be greater than the rest of us. He wasn't born on a different plane than us, and so he was just a person. Later that day, again, I'm a kid. Later that same day, we'd gone over to the Capitol building to get a chance to watch either the House or the Senate in session, and I can't remember which one we saw, but we'd gone to see Congress in session, and I don't remember what they were talking about. Actually, I do remember. I do remember that they weren't talking about anything important. That's what stood out to me. They were naming bridges for themselves and other people, and they were doing lots of very mundane things. But we had kind of some special access because of the things my grandfather was doing at the time, and so I don't remember where we were, but we were upstairs, we're in the viewing galleries, and then we'd gone over and we got on the elevator to go down the elevator, and at that time it was just me and my grandfather get on the elevator, and there's one other guy, and I look up and I know who the guy is as a kid. I'm like, I know who you are. And the guy says, who am I? I said, you're John Glenn. And he said, yes, I am. And then he talked to my grandfather for a little bit and asked my grandfather why we were there, what was going on. And by this time it's lunchtime, and he asked what we were doing, and we were actually headed to the Capitol cafeteria. And he said, well, I'm going to lunch too. Why don't I buy you guys lunch? And I think my brother might have been with us at that time. And so we went and had lunch in the cafeteria in the Capitol building with John Glenn. And it was interesting to me because out of that day, I could not have told you at that time because I said my grandparents were politically active. From that day, looking back, I could not have told you from that day if my grandparents were Democrats or Republicans. And so we met a Republican hero and a Democrat hero back to back on the same day, and the interaction was the same. One of them wasn't a good guy and the other one wasn't a bad guy. There was none of that. There was and I know now my grandparents were Democrats, but my grandparents took me to the White House, and I wasn't taught the evil guy who occupied the White House at the time was Ronald Reagan. No, it was an amazing thing. It was a powerful thing. They were just as impressed to see Ronald Reagan come walking through as I was, and that a big piece of it were that these people we might disagree with, but they were all respectable people. Of course, I knew John Glenn because I was a kid, I was into space and airplanes and all that. So to me, he was John Glenn, the astronaut. At that time, I couldn't even have told you he was John Glenn, the senator. That didn't matter to me at the time. I couldn't have cared less. But he was John Glenn, the Democrat senator, and Ronald Reagan, the Republican president, and none of that mattered, which is interesting to me.